We can start the webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The French Chamber is really pleased to welcome Esther Chen, who is decarbonization consultant for Atos China. Esther will give us some information about the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. What are the influences and opportunities in China related to this mechanism? Feel free to ask your question in the chat during the presentation. And after Esther's presentation, I will ask her the question you mentioned in the chat. Esther, the floor is yours. Esther, you're on mute. We cannot hear you.
Sorry. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Morgan, for this very kind introduction of me. Hello, everyone. I am Esther. I'm from Atos, and I want to give my special appreciation to CCIFC to organize this whole event, and also a warm welcome to all of you who wants to join me for the next hour. So as we are dealing with increasing threats from climate change, the major players around the world, they are initiating active actions to tackle the climate crisis. What we are going to talking about today will mainly focus on the climate action proposed by EU and what will be the lessons for the rest of the world. So before we get started, I want to give all of you some background information about myself and Atos. So I'm a sustainability consultant from Atos China, and I'm currently responsible for decarbonization program consulting and training and delivering decarbonization solutions to our key accounts. And I have experience in supporting global luxury brands to conduct their full cycle decarbonization programs, and also consultation workshop for industry clients like Philips and Siemens in value chain carbon footprint calculation. And I just want to give you a quick overview for Atos. We are a French company, and our expertise mainly focus in IT solutions, decarbonization consultation, and service delivery. So this is a brief overview of Atos, and let's dive into today's topic. So I'm going to share some insights from my point of view to demonstrate the influences and opportunities of CBAM and what we can prepare for this major trend of this mechanism. And we have noticed that CBAM becomes a very hot topic and across the industry, and it actually generates some very inspiring idea from this mechanism as well. So for the next an hour, we will dive in some specific details, and I hope I can bring some new ideas for your business. So I'm going to go through the content, start from what is CBAM and how it works, and the compatibility with WTO, and then the influences on China, the industry, and the companies, and how we're going to respond to this mechanism. And we will leave some time for questions at the end of the speech. Okay, let's get started. Before we dive into CBAM, I want to give you a quick look of EU's climate ambition. According to the UN, as of June 2021, there are 195 signatories to the Paris Agreement to limit their carbon emissions. However, the Paris Agreement permits countries to set their own ambitions within certain parameters. Some jurisdictions or regions, they have undertaken cut carbon emissions faster than others. The EU has stated its ambition to cut their emission by 2030 by 50% in comparison with 1990 level, which is quite ambitious. And this commitment has been made as part of the EU Green Deal, which is a comprehensive package of measurements to achieving this carbon emission. And the EU Green Deal is a package of policy initiatives which aims to set the path to a green transition with the ultimate goal of reaching their climate neutrality by 2050, and including climate, energy, agriculture, environment and oceans, transport, industry, research and innovation, finance, and regional development. All those methods will be applied in this whole package. And by applying this EU Green Deal, they promising to provide a better society and a better continent for the well-being and the health of the citizen for the future generation. So what we're going to dive in is part of this Green Deal, and it's part of their finance and regional development method. Let's move on. Before I'm diving into CBAM, I want to talk about the financial method that I was mentioned. So when we were talking about financial method, we're mainly talking about addressing the climate crisis via carbon pricing policy. Let's just have a look of this pyramid. We're going to talk about the carbon pricing policy, mainly focused on this one, carbon border adjustment mechanism. And I want to just give everyone a brief introduction of this bottom one, ETS, emission trading system, which is quite important. And also the Green Deal covers plastic tax, energy taxation directive. We're not going to elaborate more on this as well. So the carbon pricing policy mainly includes two forms, carbon taxation and carbon emission trading system. So carbon border adjustment mechanism is part of the carbon taxation method. Carbon tax is to convert the environment cost caused by carbon emission into production and operation costs through taxation. And carbon trading system is actually the allocation and trading of corporate carbon emission allowance. They are two different systems, and based on the World Bank statistics, there were 30 countries and regions have implemented carbon tax policy, and there were 25 carbon emission trading system established globally, which EU has a relatively mature system, and they have a very large scale of trading as well. Since China has already launched its national carbon emission trading market for the power generation industry in 2021, July 16th. So we currently have the largest scale of this trading market at the moment. And the CBAM we're going to addressing today is the taxation method to facilitate this climate ambition. Before we dive in, let's just have a brief look of the legislative timeline of this mechanism. So this is just a general legislative path of this mechanism, how it proposed and how it developed. And in order to facilitate this mechanism, European Commission had several discussions internally and consultation for outside stakeholders. And the details of this package is still under discussion within the Council, and it's obviously worth to keep researching on this one. So let's move into the key elements of CBAM. CBAM refers to the carbon border adjust mechanism, also known as carbon border tax. The CBAM will equalize the price of carbon between domestic products and imports and ensure that EU's climate objectives are not undermined by production relocating to countries with less ambitious policy or less strict climate policy. And this kind of mechanism already announced that there are 5 major industries: cement, iron, steel, aluminum, fertilizer, and electricity are covered by the current proposed CBAM, while this mechanism will definitely extend to other industry in a timely manner. And this mechanism is alternative to the measures that address the risks of carbon leakage. So in ETS, and it's meant to avoid that the emission reduction efforts of the Union are offset by increasing emissions outside the Union through relocation of production or increased imports of less carbon intensive products. and EU importers will buy carbon certificates according to the carbon price rules. The importers will be responsible for the declaration and information disclosure as well. So these are some basic elements for CBAM, and you might want to know how it works. So how will this proposed CBAM work? According to the related agenda, the CBAM will be applied gradually. There will be a transition phase from 2023 to 2026 before the full implementation. So it will give us some time, all the stakeholders, you will have a window to get prepared for this policy fully implemented. Once it's fully implemented, in 2026, it will work as follows. So the EU importers of goods covered by the CBAM, you need to register in the CBAM systems, and then you will get authorized and you will become the registered importer. And then you can buy CBAM certificates, and certificates are priced based on weekly ETS allowance as well. So the importers, they will declare the emission embedded in its import and surrenders the corresponding number of certificates each year. And if the importers can prove that a carbon price has already been paid during the production of the imported goods, the corresponding amount of this tax can be deducted as well. So there are two things I want everyone to keep in mind with this continuous implementation of CBAM. The embedded carbon emission calculation and the carbon data disclosure will be mandatory. These disclosure requirements will be more comprehensive in the future, which will drive companies to concentrate on their sustainability reporting as well. So when we are talking about declare the emission embed in its import, what we're talking about is embedded carbon emission. And you might want to know what is embedded carbon emission and how it's going to be calculated. So there is actually no standard definition of embedded emissions. According to CBAM proposal, the embedded carbon emission will refer to the emission that occurs in the production of goods, but not physically incorporated in the goods. So according to this proposal, embedded emissions are defined as direct emissions, which is scope 1, and indirect emissions, which is scope 2 at the moment. The imported products will be generally divided into simple products and complex products with different calculation formulas. So for simple products, which means products that only require the use of materials and fuels with zero embedded carbon emission in the manufacturing process. And for the complex products, which means the products that need to be integrated with simple products for the manufacturing. You can also call this as simple product reprocessing. And if the actual emission cannot be determined, the calculation will be carried out in these two ways. Either they will use the default value based on the average emission intensity of the exporting country and adjusting it according to an amplification factor. Or if reliable data from exporting country are not available, the average emission intensity from EU standard will be used as a default value for calculation as well. So this kind of emission calculation will be different according to the product type, and company will need to consult with expert in terms of the specific methods in calculation in practice. And this is the basic information about CBAM, and I want to dive into the topics around this mechanism. So I know there is a lot of discussion between the CBAM with WTO, and a lot of people is worrying about the compatibility with WTO. And this mechanism has stirred a heating discussion about this topic. So to devise a mechanism compatible with WTO rules, CBAM probably gonna comply with certain standards. There are two main points I want to address here. The first one is do not discriminate against importers. So as GATT prohibits different treatment between imported and domestic goods, importing manufacturers cannot be charged fees that are not charged to local manufacturers. So if local producers still receive part of their emission allowance for free, the CBAM fees cannot be charged for the full range of the importer's emission. And the second one is no equal treatment of importers from specific countries. So if the CBAM price is calculated using the default emission intensity, the global or EU average emission intensity value should be applied. And different CBAM price may be considered discriminatory if different emission intensity values are used for different countries of origins. And if a commodity has already paid a carbon price in the country of origin, different CBAM price can be charged based on the commodity's country of origin. Any such equivalence clause must be well enforced to ensure that no country's carbon pricing system is overlooked. And there are many details in this mechanism need to be discussed about the compatibility with WTO rules. And meanwhile, some people, they are worried that this CBAM, this new mechanism, might become another form of trade protectionism. And they have their points. Whether it will turn to a new type of trade protectionism is based on, I think they have like 3 points I want to address here. The first one is equivalence clause. So if the importer has paid a carbon price or a tax in the commodity's country of origin, then this fee should be deducted from the CBAM price. Hence, other countries' carbon pricing policies, carbon allowance, carbon market trading system should be considered in a fair way. And meanwhile, the complexity of global supply chain will make this taxation practice more difficult. And the policy should take the complexity of global supply chain into consideration. But to what level or to what extent, and since EU, they don't have any kind of jurisdictions rights against other countries' carbon market, will the carbon market of export countries be considered in a fair way? This will definitely need to discuss in the future, and they will bring some challenges for the implementation of this mechanism as well. And the second discussion around this mechanism will be the use of revenue. So if, as proposed, the CBAM revenue were to be used exclusively as a source of EU revenue, which means this revenue generated by this mechanism, this taxation will only be applied within the EU. This definitely could reinforce the perception that the CBAM, it is a protectionist measure. So perhaps dedicating part of the revenue to decarbonization investments within the EU or international climate change issues or climate crisis might alleviate this problem. And the last one is the calculation based on actual emission. So the possible fair implementation of CBAM would allow importers to demonstrate that the carbon intensity of their commodities is lower than the default value to get a corresponding lower CBAM prices. However, this will create challenges for administration as it will require a reporting and verification system that comply with EU standard for carbon intensity declaration. So again, to what extent that EU will recognize other carbon markets' carbon intensity and default value will directly lead to a different CBAM. So basically, to what extent they will recognize your default value depends on how much tax you're going to pay for your export products. So, and the EU, they are holding the rights and they have all the power to decide what kind of calculations results will be taken into consideration. So a lot of people was worried this mechanism will turn into a trade protectionism, and it's still a lot of discussion going on at the moment. So we're not going to elaborate more details on this one, but we're welcome for any kind of discussion if anyone has any kind of insights to contribute after this event. So for the next part, enough about the CBAM and the key elements we've talked about. I want to talk about the influences for EU and China trade. So let's have a look at these two graphs. According to the EU Stat, is a statistical database of European Union. In 2020, China's export to the EU totaled 303.5 billion euros, making it the EU's largest trading partner. So in the view of the market size and strategic significance of the EU, CBAM is already become an inevitable challenges to China's export trade to the EU. And from these two graphs, we can find that in 2021, EU exports of manufactured goods, most exported manufactured goods were machinery and vehicles, followed by other manufactured goods and chemicals. And the most imported manufactured goods were machinery and vehicles, followed by other manufactured goods and chemicals as well. So from this paragraph, we can find that this top 20 goods covered 63% of the total trade in 2021, and 12 belong to machinery and vehicles. 6 to another belongs to manufactured goods, and 2 to chemicals. The most traded group of goods at this level was telecommunication equipment. So I've mentioned there are 5 major industries that are covered by CBAM at the moment: the cement, iron, steel, aluminum, fertilizer, and electricity. So these items mentioned above, this either imports or exports, they all related to the major industry covered by CBAM. So basically the machinery, vehicles, chemicals, telecommunication equipment, and other industry will be strongly influenced by this whole CBAM mechanism. And it's already a constant that CBAM will change the basic situation of China-EU trade pattern at the moment as well. So this is a comparison between EU and China carbon market. I think I've mentioned the emission trading system at the very beginning. So here is just a general comparison between EU's ETS and Chinese ETS. As an important part of the EU Green Deal, CBAM will become a new trend for global carbon pricing policy as well. And based on this paragraph, we can find that EU have a relatively comprehensive trading system, which they are covering more industries, and they have many years experience ahead of us. So we think this kind of carbon mechanism will not just bring threats to the trade relationship between EU and China, it will also create some opportunities to us as well. So it always comes with threats and opportunities. The trade relationship between EU and China will be defined due to all these climate policies. And obviously, China will start to initiate actions with EU to promote joint climate cooperation in the international multilateral climate governance framework. And the green investment and low carbon technology trade will be promoted to enhance cooperation with EU. There will be more efforts addressing climate change through pragmatic cooperation, and the government, obviously, they will increase their cooperation no matter if the industry covered by the CBAM or not. And most of the exports products, as we all know, from China to EU are at the middle or lower end of the international industrial chain with very high energy consumption because of the electricity carbon emission factor is much higher than EU average because of our energy structure at the moment. So the exported products will definitely face the challenges of cost raising, profit margin declining, and threats from low carbon substitutes at the same time. But it will facilitate the transformation of Chinese energy sector and the industrial dynamic. Apart from the relationship between EU and China, apart from the trading relationship, the development of the domestic carbon trading markets will be accelerated, and the carbon tax will be introduced in a timely manner. We've mentioned the EU that they have a pretty much mature carbon trading system, and they've already introduced the carbon tax. So China's only got their trading system start from last year. So the construction of our carbon market system will be accelerated. The whole carbon market system will become more comprehensive in the future. And the scope of the participating entities and emission controls will be expanded. And the threshold for enterprises to enter the carbon market will be lower. But because at the moment, we've only covered energy, we only cover the electricity generating industry. So it will accelerate the development of the domestic carbon market and strive to promote the integration of the domestic carbon market with the international carbon market to help the Chinese enterprises to get certain level of exemption from carbon tax. And China will be exploring their carbon taxation measures and collaborate with the current trading system in a timely manner. We've already started to researching our own carbon taxation method. And meanwhile, we think in cooperating low-emitting industry into emission reductions through carbon tax will increase the pressure and will give more motivation for companies to reduce their emission initially. So this mechanism will definitely change a lot, not just from the country level. It will have a profound influences to the industry and the company as well. There will be so many changes across different industry, and we have to be prepared for all this. So if next I want to dive into the influences for the industries and the companies. The EU, the CBAM, this whole mechanism will redefine the EU-China value chains, and the industries and company will need to reconsider their choices in a operational level. So the biggest initial impact will be on the cost of high carbon inputs such as steel, cement, aluminum, chemicals, and electricity, the four major industries. The EU importers and non-EU producers of these inputs will be required to pay an estimated 75 euro per metric tons of their carbon emissions. And this could increase the cost of materials made by more carbon-intensive producers. And this impact suggests that it will fall most heavily on the supply chains of certain industry sectors such as automotive, construction, packaging, and consumer appliance. And this industry costs for key inputs such as steel and aluminum will rise. And companies will need to take actions to maintain their competitiveness as well. And for Chinese enterprises that within the scope, within the CBAM, they might consider to import the required energy-intensive raw materials from EU or other countries with a similar carbon pricing mechanism to get the possible exemption from CBAM. And some company which is indirectly hit by this carbon border tax, they may choose low carbon alternatives to their original raw materials to export to EU to reduce the carbon tax they need to pay in order to remain competitive. So to some extent, they may turn to suppliers that manufacture within the EU or other suppliers with lower carbon emission. And let's have a look of this graph. We want to assessing the impact across industries and countries. So the impact of the carbon border tax will be felt in many major industries. just simply divided the major industry users into simply supply chain and complex supply chain. So we can find that the steel, aluminum, and electricity basically will be applied in all kinds of industry. And among the commodities that China export to EU, steel and aluminum are the most affected, with a combined annual export value around 1.8 billion euro. And mainly steel plates and aluminum for like automobiles, machinery and equipment, construction and other industries. And machinery and equipment, as we were mentioned before, is the most important and exported products to EU. And with the steel industry already facing exercise capacity, and it's even difficult for them to pass on the additional cost of carbon tax to their consumers or other parties of this supply chain. And not to mention, with the CBAM implementation, it would become even difficult for the exports of the steel products. And large companies who export steel or aluminum products to EU, their advantages will be weakening as well. So either simply supply chain or complex supply chain products will face a taxation pressure since their production extensively include this kind of raw material in production. And I want to give you an example. So let's have an example for automobile industry, which is very specific one. For example, an average four-door car that contains around 7 metric tons of embedded carbon emissions, and almost half of which come from the steel and aluminum during the production. So if the carbon prices approach 75 euro per metric ton by the time the border tax is fully implemented in 2026, the levy payable just on steel and aluminum alone would be approximately around 245 euro per metric ton. So once the entire supply chain were included within the scope, the estimated carbon border tax might exceed 500 euro just for one car. So it's pretty much your cost will rising rapidly. And the cost impact will drive end customers to change their purchasing behavior, which will affect the relative competitiveness of companies that export these products to EU. And for the less carbon intensive producers who are going to pay lower tax rate, their products will become more attractive in the EU market. So as I was mentioned, the whole dynamic of the industry will be redefined. Perhaps you have some competitiveness at the moment, but once the CBAM fully implemented, you're probably going to lose part of your competitiveness. And perhaps your competitors, they will have more advantages than you. So it's really a timely matter for us to identify the whole influences and finding out your advantages and the weaknesses under this mechanism. And this is just a major industry who will be redefined under the CBAM and beyond the whole CBAM. So we are not going to dive into the specific analysis in details here, but we are welcome for any kind of open discussion offline, and we will share this content after this speech as well. So enough about the influences. We've talking about the key elements about CBAM, how it's going to work and how it's going to affect our industry and the companies. As a business navigator, what can we prepare for this situation? This is the next part I want to addressing. As we all know, there are many multinational companies that have already proposed their carbon neutral strategies to take, and they also take actions to reduce their carbon footprint of their supply chain. And I think many of you might heard about the green consumption advocacy action initiated by EU Commission companies like Decathlon, L'Oreal, and Lego, they have already participated in this action and proposed their own carbon neutral strategies. So we believe that it is critical for companies to take initiatives and start their carbon neutrality plan when facing the increasing pressure from the climate regulations. So for this part, I'll demonstrate this plan from 3 steps. Let's dive into each steps. The first one, we would recommend you to, as a leader and a decision maker, we really hope you will seize the opportunity to transform your business into a sustainable one. And it's critical for business leaders to identifying the calls for actions, priority ranking, and interdependencies between measures. And the environment is changing, and you need to initiate the changes within your group. So there are a path for this kind of transformative mindset. So first, you need to analyze your exposure. You have to quantify how the carbon border tax will impact your company across the value chain, and you will need to evaluate potential CBAM impact on operations. And of course, you will need to have understanding of the compliance requirements from CBAM. After analyzing your exposure, then you need to measure your business exposure. You need to start research the policy and the compliance and gain a clear understanding of your company's carbon footprint. Companies which based in countries with very limited carbon reporting mandates may have to build this capacity rapidly because they are lack of efficient carbon trading system, and they will be definitely highly influenced by this CBAM system. And then you need to review your enterprise's value chain, and you review your value chain and your footprint, which is related to the expected CBAM, and you have to understand your company from a carbon pricing perspective. And the carbon footprint embedded carbon emission need to be reconsidered for your procurement decision as well, which means you need to build this flexibility into your supply chains to engage specific measures. And you will need to develop joint plans with your key suppliers at this stage, and you will need to reassess your supply chain as well. And then you need to mitigate all this impact with specific approach. This approach would be different based on different companies' reality, and it covers fields like environmental protection, compliance management, the calculation of carbon emission footprint. You can choose pass on or share the cost to your end customer, or renegotiate with your supplier. You can choose to investing in more efficient industry process, or substituting higher carbon materials with lower carbon ones. You could choose to adjust your market layout to transfer to new energy, to analyze your carbon tax cost accounting, etc. So it comes with all kinds of approaches, and it's really based on your company's reality. And you should quickly determine which is most appropriate for yourself, for your company, for the industry. And then you need to navigate and shape the strategies. So initiate the transformation from top and seize the window time to shape the sustainable strategy. Like I was mentioned at the very beginning, this CBAM mechanism will be applied gradually, and there will be a transition phase for everyone to get prepared. So you need to proactively engage in the policy making process, and you need to help to shape the final version of a sustainability mechanism within your organization to protect your company and secure your competitive advantages, because your competitive advantage at the moment will somehow go away once this CBAM implemented fully. And I'm not sure if you still remember that I have mentioned two things about CBAM when it's fully implemented in 2026. The emission data calculation and the carbon data disclosure will become urgent. And I also mentioned this one in this phase, in this stage as well. So for the next part, what you're gonna do is you need to have a full assessment for your carbon footprint. This is the standard procedure for your carbon footprint assessment. You start from decide on which emission accounting standard to follow. There are GHG protocol, or you could follow ISO 14076, or there are other standards, and you have to choose which one is more suitable for your industry or your company or your products. And then you need to define your organization and operational boundaries. Do pre-scoping, validation of the scope, schedule, and contributors, mapping of the flow and identification of the significant emission sources. And then you need to collect the data to development a customized data collection method to verify the quality and validate of the collected data. And then you need to conduct your calculation to select relevant emission factors and to calculate your carbon footprint. And then you need to analyze the data and the whole emission conditions. After that, you need to verify your emissions result to formalize the analysis of results and the emissions footprint. And you are going to form your carbon footprint assessment report, and you're getting a full picture of the current emission situation for follow-up reduction plan. After you've got your report, then you need to communicate your progress. You need to pinpoint the opportunities to reduce the carbon emission within your organization and to communicate and share the report across related stakeholder, and then you need to monitor, manage, and measuring your process. This is just a very standard procedure for carbon footprint assessment, and it will be definitely different based on different companies. And after you have gained the full assessment of carbon footprint of your industry, of your company, or of your product, then you will need to conduct a detailed report for all kinds of data that you need to disclose. Since you have already gained the full picture of your emission status, and we will recommend you to prepare for a sustainability reporting. We'll recommend you to conduct a sustainability reporting, which we will dive into the third step. It's sustainability reporting. So for the sustainability reporting, we all know Chinese exports, they can use this CBAM mechanism to deduct their trade cost. But the precondition is that your carbon cost can be quantified and your carbon tariff declaration are accurate. So why we are suggesting sustainability reporting, because the sustainability reporting, which includes the high standard of carbon data disclosure. And once you are declaring your data to the EU and you have to follow their standards, which means you will face more financial or legal risk at the moment as well. So at this point, sustainability reporting is become quite mandatory, and we will suggest you to conduct this kind of reporting as early as you can. To take a high standard for this kind of reporting will prepare you for the future compliance requirements, not just for CBAM. There will be other kind of mechanism from other country. It will come eventually. So for this kind of sustainability reporting, there are all kinds of sustainability reports across different industry. We're not going to elaborate in all the details here, but I'm going to share two main standards. The first one is ESG. I think everyone heard about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. since many of the long-term impacts of companies on the environment and societies are not directly reflected in your financial statements, the ESG system, which combines environmental, social, and governance, is becoming a new co-investment strategy. And more countries and regions have begun to encourage or even request companies, especially for the listed company, to issue their ESG reports and disclosure their ESG information as well. So for the ESG report, we want to talk about GRI. The GRI standards represents one of the most widely used framework for environmental reporting by the organizations, and a variety of the organizers is using ESG systems, and especially for the large industry groups, and they are the first agreed upon global standards for sustainability reporting, and the reporting can be externally verified to demonstrate accuracy and veracity as well. So GRI is a very good standard that you can choose to follow. And another category I want to share is the investor-led one, CDP. A lot of people heard about CDP. CDP is a non-profit organization and supported by many investors globally. For those who report to CDP, either they're responding to requests fired by investors, or they're responding to a request fired by their customer, or they're just self-selected companies. And most large operations report currently, and over 30,000 companies are responding to this CDP report at the moment. And CDP has extremely high visibility for stakeholders, investors, and peers. And it has a very high reputation value for those who score an A or make the A list. It enables your investor to see that companies are incorporating sustainability into their business strategy and practices. So these details are demonstrated here as follow, and we will share this offline as well. We're not going to elaborate on much details on this one, but we will come to any kind of discussion offline. What we need to see is that many invisible trade barriers not only exist in the form of CBAM, and the embedded environmental protection requirements into economic activities such as trade and investment is becoming a global trend. So when we are tackling the climate change challenges by these solutions, we must be flexible and transformative. So from my personal experience, I believe some companies, they will need some external support to achieve their carbon neutrality ambitions. They will need some experts to help. And this is just a quick overview for what we are doing at the moment for Atos. There are some major services we have provided for our industry clients, and as a sustainability consultant, we have provided different solutions from the perspectives of consultation, digital, and nature to ensure our clients to get their best net zero practices. So the dynamic of the industry is transforming, and we will see new businesses rising, and some business will be deducted under the trend of this climate issues. And what we have discussing today is not just a window dressing topic. Only if we have a sustainable planet or this industry and the business will have a chance to go on. And the last point I want to share is either the corporate social responsibility or sustainability development, they have already become mandatory, which won't give us much time for hesitation. It's already coming. Either CBAM or other kinds of taxation policies, they are or on the way. And even China, they are researching to launch our own carbon taxation in a timely manner. So whether or not, whether you are ready or not, and you have to act now, it will affect your business directly. And like I was mentioned, some company will be replaced by the other, and there will be new business model rising as well. So I've shared some very humble thoughts from my very own personal experience, and now we are open for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thanks a lot, Esther. Thanks a lot for this really interesting presentation. Indeed, we received some question, and I sent it to you, but in the group chat, the first question is, when do you think the trade price of carbon credit in China will catch up with the one in Europe? Today, it's around 60 USD for one credit in Europe and only 7 USD by credit in China. And do you think this will reduce the China's competitivity in global trade?
This is a really good question, and I can only answer this question based on my very personal experience, because in terms of this question, I will recommend you to have a research, obviously, from the financial perspective. But like I was mentioned, the EU, they have a relatively higher carbon price at the moment because they have a pretty mature system already. They have a lot of years experience ahead of us. And for our carbon trading system, it's just started, and it's only included the electricity generation industry. And everything is still in a trial and error phases at the moment. And we will take the experience from European trading market, or like I was saying, we study on our own trading taxation at the moment as well. We don't think that this will somehow affect the trading relationship between EU and China. We don't think that this will somehow weakening our advantages in the trade with EU. It will somehow help us to transform into a more sustainability way, and then for the industry or for the other companies who will be covered by this system. I'm not sure if I have answered your question.
It's not my question, but I guess you answered, yeah. So we can go to the second question. Is according to some information, the disclosure of carbon data will be mandatory from next year. How is it to work?
Yes, this is a very good one as well. The carbon data disclosure will become mandatory start from next year, the phase 1 from 2023 to 2026. But how it's going to work, the influences will be different for the importer and exporter. So since the importer, they will take the responsibility to declare, and they will have to make sure that all their carbon data is ready for their products, and they have to make sure all their data is qualified with EU standard. So apart from importer and for the exporter, and they will be required by their clients who import their products for disclosing the carbon data based on EU standard. And this will definitely create a lot of challenges for those small and medium-sized companies, which they have business with some EU imports at this moment. And it's very difficult for them to conduct certain kind of calculation and data disclosure based on EU standard, which is very complex as well. And they will probably be substituted by their EU importers. And meanwhile, we all know to some multinational companies, they are both importers and exporters. So they have their production line in China, and then they will their products will export to EU. So apart from carbon data disclosure, which they have already got experience in EU in practice, and they will have to re-evaluate their supply chain once this whole system implemented, and once this disclosure requirements implemented, they will have to reconsider if they want to move some of their suppliers or some of their supply chain to another so-called low carbon emission cost countries to reduce the cost attached with carbon tax. To sum up, the carbon footprint calculation, your assessment of the current carbon emission status will need to be conducted as soon as possible to face any kind of challenges. Once it's fully implemented, and you won't have much time to get prepared. Yeah, not sure if I answered this question.
Thanks a lot. We can go to the third question. Since the timeline is set, is there any reminders for companies who are preparing for this situation?
So this is a very good question, and thanks for raising this one. I think I'll have 3 main reminders for the companies at this moment. So first one, you need to stay focused on the changes of the policy, because as we've mentioned, there are some details still under discussion, and there are different viruses for different type of company. So you will definitely need to conduct your research, either it's policy related, financial related, legal related, all kinds of related issues based on your company's reality, because different industry and different companies, they will be influenced in a different level. And the second one, you need to get a full picture again of your emission status. Maybe go beyond carbon footprint assessment, not just carbon footprint. Certainly you should start from that, but prepare for a full disclosure of your sustainability status is always better. So like we all know, it's better to take precautions, right? And the third one will be getting external support. I was mentioning before, there's a lot of companies, they are facing challenges. They have no idea how to calculate their carbon footprint. They have no idea how to disclose this data. They don't have idea like where to start. They have the ambition, they have the plan, but they just don't know how to work in reality. So you will need experts to support to get a better understanding or get a better operation pattern based on your business reality. And it will involve like environment compliance management, market strategy adjustment, production processing, improving, carbon tax cost accounting, and etc. And you will definitely need experts to support you from different perspectives. And also, we will recommend that you start to train your own staff, start to conduct internal training, and because this kind of talents will be quite hot in the market. And it's really need to start now because there's not much time left. And since the mechanism, the transition phase start from next year, and all the importers, they will need to disclose their data from next year's May. So pretty much you need to start now. Yeah, thank you, Morgan.
Thanks a lot. We can go for the last question.
Okay.
For industries which are not covered by CBAM at the moment, is it necessary to conduct certain coping methods, since the carbon assessment and sustainable reporting are complex?
Yes, this is a very good one. I know some of the industry, they haven't been covered by CBAM at the moment, but as I was mentioned, the CBAM is evolving, and it's possible, not just possible, it's highly possible that they will extend to the full supply chain. They will expand to all kinds of industries. So it is quite important that you need to conduct your carbon emission status assessment now, and not even just because, not even for only for CBAM, it's also for other kind of regulations in terms of climate crisis, because there are other countries, they are trying to issuing some kind of similar system or regulations as well. And you're not covered by CBAM at the moment. It doesn't mean you're not going to be covered in a timely manner. And this whole mechanism will evolving, and it will facilitate EU to achieve their carbon ambition before 2015. So don't worry if your industry is not covered at the moment, it will be covered in the future. And again, and if you are not covered at the moment, you will have longer time to get prepared, and you will have more time comparing with other industry already being covered, and you will gain your competitive advantages if you conduct your emission status assessment and all kinds of sustainability reporting beforehand.
Okay, thanks a lot for these answers. And it was the last question. Thanks a lot also for the really interesting presentation. I guess we bring some really interesting information to the members. And we would like to thank Atos as well for organizing this event with us. For the people that attended, if you still have some questions, feel free to get in touch with us, and then we will send this question to Atos team. Thanks a lot to everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone to join me today. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.